Welcome to this explainer. We've got a wild one today. We're going to take a fascinating look at the incredible rise and the very dramatic fall of the Dutch squatting movement. This is a story all about underground culture, soaring real estate, and a battle for the very soul of the city of Amsterdam.
Picture this. What happens when 130 people just illegally take over a massive 45-hectare abandoned shipyard? Sounds like the plot of a dystopian movie, right? Well, back in 1997, it was reality. The takeover of the ADM shipyard in Amsterdam created this wild, totally off-grid community right in the middle of one of Europe's busiest port cities.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our roadmap. We'll start with the ADM squatter utopia, look at the birth of the crackers, weigh culture versus property rights, hit the 2010 squatting ban, cover the fall of ADM, and wrap up with the ongoing housing crisis. Part 1. The ADM squatter utopia. Inside Amsterdam's massive autonomous enclave. You really got to picture the scale of this place to understand what happened. We're talking 45 hectares sitting right along the North Sea Canal. Artists, activists, and folks who just needed a place to live, they totally transformed this derelict post-industrial wasteland into a self-governing village. Imagine 130 residents living completely off the grid. They're collecting rainwater, and get this, by 2014, volunteers actually overhauled an old office roof to install 200 solar panels. And the culture? Absolutely wild. They were literally scavenging industrial scrap to build things like interactive robotic horses. And they even put up a massive metal tree that weighed over 3 tons. It was like a giant real-life steampunk playground. Part 2. Birth of the Crackers, the origins of the Dutch squatter movement. So, you're probably wondering, how on earth do you pull that off legally? How do you just occupy a massive port facility for over 2 decades without getting kicked out on day 1? Well, it comes down to a concept called kraken, which is the Dutch word for squatting. But here's the crucial thing. This wasn't your typical hiding in the shadows kind of trespassing. The crackers were a super visible, highly organized political movement. They sprang up because of massive housing shortages and crazy real estate speculation. Buildings were literally sitting empty while thousands of people desperately needed homes. This whole thing actually started simmering back in the 1960s, driven by counterculture and a severe lack of housing. But the real game changer? That was 1971. The Dutch Supreme Court made a huge ruling about something called domestic peace. Basically, they established that if you managed to get a chair, a table, and a bed inside an empty property, you were officially considered a resident. No joke, the owner couldn't just kick the door down anymore. They literally had to take you to court. This massive legal loophole was like throwing gas on a fire. The movement just exploded, eventually leading to some really intense street battles in the 1980s, like the Vondelstraat riots and the massive protest during the Queen's coronation. Moving on to part 3, culture versus property rights, the core debate at the heart of the shipyard. So, keeping that wild legal history in mind, the whole existence of ADM boils down to this epic clash. The utopian dream of the occupants versus the empirical reality of property ownership. Let's look at both sides here neutrally, just to see how fundamentally incompatible these worldviews really are. On one hand, you've got the squatter's view. To them, ADM was this beautiful, irreplaceable cultural free haven. It was a functioning circular economy based on mutual aid, totally driven by the belief that housing is a fundamental human right, not just something to buy and sell. But then, flip the coin. From the perspective of the state and the property owner, this was a straight-up illegal violation of private property rights. Plus, you had completely unregulated fire and environmental hazards on site. And economically speaking, having prime port real estate occupied for free was blocking millions in potential tax revenue and formal job creation. 2 totally different planets, right? And speaking of economics, 165 million euros, that is a staggering amount of money. But that's exactly what the city of Amsterdam ended up paying in 2025 to buy back this prime Portland so they could develop it for maritime and logistics businesses. That number really puts into perspective the massive economic opportunity cost of that 21-year occupation. The stakes for that land were incredibly high. Part 4. The 2010 squatting ban. The legislative crackdown on the crackers. Eventually, something had to give on a national level. The political winds shifted, and the Dutch parliament finally said enough is enough, officially passing a nationwide ban that made squatting a criminal offense. And man, the state did not waste any time. Between 2010 and 2014, authorities arrested 529 people across the country as they systematically started clearing out these occupied buildings. The impact of that ban was absolute.
I mean, we're talking about an 80% drop in reported squatting cases in Amsterdam over the next decade. The ban worked immediately, drastically shrinking the scale and visibility of the entire Crocker movement across the city. The era of widespread tolerance, that was officially over.
Part 5. The Fall of ADM, the explosive 2019 eviction and destruction. So this new hardened legal reality finally catches up to the gates of the ADM shipyard in 2019. The Utopia was facing eviction, and it turned into a massive international drama. It wasn't just a local Amsterdam dispute anymore. The United Nations actually got involved. Seriously, UN Special Rapporteur Leilani Farha officially asked the Dutch government to hold off on the eviction, pointing to the residents' cultural and human rights claims. But you know, international requests are one thing, strict Dutch civil law is another. The Raad van State, that's the highest administrative court in the Netherlands, they didn't budge. They firmly upheld the enforcement order. After decades of exhaustive legal appeals, the court basically ruled that Dutch property law prioritizes the owner's right to do what they want with their land, unless there's some massive, undeniable public necessity. The green light for eviction was officially lit. Let's walk step by step through how those dramatic final days actually played out, because it happened incredibly fast. January 7th, 2019, riot police roll in. They immediately start dismantling the barricades the residents had built. By the very next afternoon, January 8th, they were physically extracting the last few holdouts from the rooftops, resulting in 11 arrests. But the truly shocking part was the immediate aftermath. Within hours, literally hours, the property owners brought in excavators and bulldozers. They just totally flattened the homes, the art installations, all that tangible heritage that took 21 years to build. It was swiftly and permanently destroyed. ADM was gone. Which brings us to part 6, the ongoing housing crisis. A new generation faces an old problem. Now, here's what you should really take away from this explainer. The ADM utopia might be history, but the intense pressures that created it back in the 90s, they have only intensified. We've got a whole new generation facing an incredibly old problem. Housing prices in Amsterdam right now are soaring past cities like London. It is an unbearable squeeze, especially for young folks and lower-income residents. Meanwhile, the state is rolling out even faster legal mechanisms to shut down occupations. In 2022, a new law enforcing the squatting ban was enacted. This allows for immediate evictions, sometimes happening before the squatters even get a chance to state their case in front of a magistrate. Those legal loopholes of the past are being completely slammed shut. And yet, despite all those strict new laws, the crackers are actually making a comeback. There's this great quote from Sene Bolstas in The Guardian that really hits the nail on the head. She wrote, "The return of squatting is a symptom of a public mood that is increasingly furious about the lack of solutions." Basically, because that fundamental, gaping disparity in the housing market is still entirely unsolved, people are cycling right back to the radical tactics the government tried so hard to stamp out. Which leaves us with this final, incredibly complex question to chew on. Moving forward, how on earth are modern cities going to balance this desperate need for affordable, creative living spaces with the undeniable realities of economic development and property rights? It's a massive puzzle, and the tension isn't going away anytime soon. Well, thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope it gave you a clear, solid understanding of this fascinating urban battleground. Keep questioning the spaces around you, and I'll see you next time.